Forest, and one of the most famous trees in the world, the major oak, at least 800 years old, and one of the biggest trees in Britain, and in 2015 voted European Tree of the Year. Hello, my name's Mandy Buckley. The legend is that Robin Hood's men sheltered in here. Well, it certainly is big enough. At one time, it was called the Cock Pen because they held cockfighting in there. Then in Victorian times, it was known as the Queen Oak, and then the Major's Oak, and now the Major Oak. It got that name when it was described, drawn and painted by one Major Hayman Rooke. It's ironic that although he was a prolific artist, there is no portrait of Hayman Rooke. He probably looked like this, but we don't know. We do know that among the activities for which he became famous were his drawings and paintings, his love of trees and his archaeological discoveries. Hayman was born in London in 1723 to a well-to-do family. This is their coat of arms. They lived in Berkeley Street, Piccadilly, and Hayman was baptised at St Martin in the Fields Church off Trafalgar Square. When he was still a young boy, he became a page to the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, who also happened to be the 4th Duke of Devonshire. Then at the age of 14, someone bought Hayman a commission in an army foot regiment, beginning a military career that took him through several campaigns at home and abroad, finally to retire as a major. Having left the army, for the next 15 years or so, he seemed to have no permanent address, but travelled around, drawing and painting landscapes, individual trees, and sometimes relics that he found interesting. The Isle of Wight, Sussex, Scotland, even icebergs off the coast of Newfoundland. And all his travels were on horseback, with the possible exception of Newfoundland. Then in the year 1777, he took the opportunity of buying this property from an old army friend, Woodhouse Place in Mansfield Woodhouse. Hayman extended and altered the old farmhouse, but the battlements weren't added until about the 1950s. This is it today, still occupied. His acquisition of the house was a blessing to the local area, as it enabled him to be active in all his many interests. He himself became part of the history of Sherwood. These stones are called the butter stumps, and they're a mystery. There's no written record of them, and any information we do have is folktale. The story is that in the 1600s, the local farmers' wives would bring their homemade butter to sell to passing coaches and rest their baskets on these stumps. One of the several puzzling aspects of the butter stumps is that there is no trace of any comment from Rooke. You'd think that as they're sitting immediately outside his garden gate, he would have something to say about these strange little stones. Welcome to Linda Hardy, who is Marketing and Events Officer at Sherwood Forest Trust. Hello, Linda.
Hi, pleased to meet you, Mandy.
Linda, why is Hayman Rooke important to Sherwood Forest?
Okay, well, Major Hayman Rooke was incredibly interested in his area in Sherwood Forest and the place where he lived. He rode out there every day, he knew a lot about it. But I think he was probably the first person to realise that the oaks of Sherwood Forest, the ancient character oaks, were landmarks. They were pieces of living history. He actually wrote 2 pamphlets about Sherwood Forest. One was about the remarkable oaks of Sherwood Forest, and that was mostly about the oak trees in Welbeck Park. And the other one was actually about the state of Sherwood Forest. I think he was really probably the first person to appreciate the importance of the historic trees to the heritage of the area, as well as to the biodiversity and to the nature. He was interested in them as landmarks and part of the Sherwood Forest landscape. And I think probably he was the first person to write about them and make people want to go and visit them.
How fascinating.
I know. So really, in a way, he sparked off the later Victorian boom in tourism to Sherwood Forest, and I would say that boom is still continuing today, because of course thousands of people still come to look at the beautiful trees of Sherwood Forest, don't they?
That's really interesting, thank you. Tell us about Sherwood Forest Trust.
So the Sherwood Forest Trust is a small charity. It's based in the village of Edwinstowe, a Sherwood Forest village, and it's been established for about 27 years now, actually. We do lots and lots of projects based around conservation. So that's about conserving the unique habitats of Sherwood Forest for nature. And we get lots of local people to help us with that, getting them engaged with the local environment, the green environment. But we also do a lot of projects about history and heritage, because we'd really like to help people to get involved in the history of the place. Sherwood Forest, such a long history, so fascinating, so lots of our projects are about that.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you, Linda.
It's been a pleasure.
The forest is made up primarily of birch and oak trees. Today it covers over 1,000 acres, but in the 11th century, when the Domesday Book was written, it covered a quarter of Nottinghamshire. The life cycle of an oak tree is about 300 years to grow, 300 years to rest, and another 300 years to decline. So back to the major oak, which Hayman Rooke made famous and which made him famous. Rooke did this sketch of the tree, in those days called the Queen Oak. It's aged somewhat since then. In 1790, the picture was published in his book, Remarkable Oaks. The tree weighs around 23 tons. It's 33 feet round, and the branches spread to over 92 feet. It still produces acorns, apparently about 150,000 a year, and is home to a variety of wildlife too. The name Sherwood was first recorded in 958 AD, when it was called Siuridae. meaning the woodland belonging to the Shire. It became a royal hunting forest after the Norman invasion in 1066 and was popular with many Norman kings, particularly King John and Edward I. Do trees have personalities? Well, this one does, and histories. This is Churn or Church Oak, so called because it was a meeting place for nonconformists. The Duke's walking stick, so called, doesn't exist anymore. They say it was unmatched for height and straightness. Rooke recorded that it was 111 feet and 6 inches high and weighed around 11 tons. The Porter Oaks were given that name from the time when a gate stood between them and they acted as porters, well, sort of. The Greendale Oak is another tree to have disappeared in recent years. It was there in Rooke's day, of course, and he wrote, "This famous oak is thought to be above 700 years old, and the main attraction, as he said, lay in its having an archway cut through its trunk." A photo of the tree was taken in 1911, but apart from that and Rooke's illustrations, the only relic today is the pub in Cockney near Mansfield.
Now here's a tree that's very much still with us, and one with quite a story, the so-called Parliament Oak. And this is Rooke's drawing of it. But as you can see nowadays, it's decaying at a fast rate. It got its name, the Parliament Oak, from the year 1212, when the tree was already several hundred years old and King John had his hunting lodge nearby. The story is that King John called a meeting of his parliament underneath these branches to discuss insurrection in Wales and northern England. So why meet here? Perhaps there wasn't enough room at the lodge for everyone. Or maybe he didn't want the place disturbed by lots of parliamentary feet. Today the lodge is called King John's Palace, and there's a path we can follow, so let's see what remains. Here I am at King John's Palace, previously known as the King's House. It's described as the most important medieval site in Sherwood Forest. For instance, the fact that Richard the Lionheart chose the palace for the start of a state visit by the King of Scots in April 1194 shows what an upmarket pad this was for its time. It was also a favourite of the Plantagenet kings when they visited Sherwood, the first being King John, he of the Parliament Oak, to Richard II, so we're talking about a period of at least 200 years. The experts describe this curved doorway as Romanesque and date this part of the building to before the 1200s.
This is how Rooke saw it in 1805 and his idea of the ground plan, which is a suitable point for us to look at Rooke's many antiquarian activities.
This is the view of an expert on our local history.
Hayman Rooke, in my mind, added much to the way that we carry out research in. For instance, in his beloved world of archaeology, he taught people not to go through the bulldozer method, which was very much in operation in his day, which is where people would just dig and dig and dig as fast as they could to get to the end result, which might be the bottom of a burial mound. He taught them to take their time and to record it stage by stage with both text and sketches to ensure that nothing was lost. It has been said of Hayman Rooke that he was 100 years ahead of his time.
And to start, I'm on my way to the site that put Rooke's name on the archaeological map. We're about a mile away from his home in Mansfield Woodhouse, on farmland, as it was in his day. Local people were talking about picking up what they called fairy stones in the ploughed field. Rooke started digging around and found that the fairy stones were in fact pieces of mosaic floor. He set 3 men to dig, and over the course of the year they uncovered the remains of 2 Roman buildings. He also drew these plans describing the buildings as 2 villas discovered in the North Fields near Mansfield Woodhouse in May and October 1786. The residential building, which he named Villa Urbana, the townhouse, and the other more humble dwelling, Villa Rustica, the rural house. Rooke's main image here shows details of the underfloor construction. In these drawings, Rooke imagined how the buildings would have looked. When the excavation of Villa Urbana reached floor level, this is what Rooke found and drew, the beautiful mosaic pavement. A colour version based on Rooke's descriptions. A building was erected to protect the mosaic pavement, and Rooke painted this picture in 1787. Sadly, before many years had passed, the building was vandalised and destroyed. In the 1980s, a very imaginative model of the site was made and presented to Mansfield Museum, where it's still on display. Rooke commented that the villa must have belonged to a person of some note and consideration. Just outside the boundary of the complex, Rooke discovered some tombs, 2 of them, which he described as mausoleums, and produced this highly detailed sheet. When Rooke's report on the villa was read at the Antiquarian Society, he was widely congratulated. And this, of course, encouraged him to continue and extend his archaeological work in Nottinghamshire and beyond. And reminders of his work live on. Rooke drew this sketch of some of the relics found at the villa site. The image in the centre of the drawing shows the hypocaust, the Roman underfloor heating system. Mansfield Museum has this lovely exhibit. It's a Roman roof tile, but as you can see, a small dog has planted its paw print in the soft clay. We know that the tiles for the villa were probably made near Sukhum, just over 3 miles north of Mansfield Woodhouse. Rooke excavated there and drew this sketch of the site, saying it was where the Romans got their clay. He didn't find any kilns, but he did find a stack of tiles nearby, so there really isn't much doubt where the villa tiles did come from.
In the 1930s, there was another excavation of the villa site, and these are some of the finds that are on display at Cresswell Crags, all probably dating from about AD 180.
A Derbyshire pot and iron nails. Samian ware, Roman pottery that is. Pieces of clay roof tiles. A bronze and enamelled brooch. Fragments of coloured glass. Blue glass from scent bottles. Bottle glass. And the neck and handle from an amphora, a storage jar.
This is a walk you can take around the villa site, which includes part of the Needham Trail. Although you can't see the villa today, it is worth coming and having a look and imagining what an important part of our local history lies in this field. Thanks to Major Hayman Rooke.
But his enthusiasm for antiquities didn't end there. This is Coombs Farm, between Oxton and Farnsfield, where the remains of a very old settlement were discovered by Rooke 3 years after the villa. As he often did, he drew a plan of the site, showing the farm on the ridge overlooking earthworks below. Continuous farming over the years has obliterated these features for us today, but with a bit of imagination and some modern technology, we can form an idea of what they were like. The hill was obviously far higher in Rooke's day than it is now. 1.25 miles from Coombs Farm on the main road, you can clearly see a structure known as Old Ox, which Rooke investigated. The 2 mounds at the top of the ridge were tumuli, Roman graves, or barrows as they're also called. Nestling behind the tumuli is very clear evidence of a settlement or camp, probably originally from the Iron Age. This is a modern artist's impression of Old Ox. Rooke drew this plan of the site. It shows the camp surrounded by a double bank and single ditch, except on one side where there's a triple bank and a double ditch. From the top, you get a good view of where the camp was located, here. You can see the well-defined entrance at one end, and how the steep natural escarpment was part of the camp's defences. And from the bottom, looking up at the tumuli, a general view of the camp layout. This is Rooke's plan, orientated in the correct relation to the actual site. And a closer look at one of the defensive ditches. You can see how high the banks are and how deep the ditches are, even now. These are 3 more ditches recorded by Rooke on the other side of the site, now quite overgrown with trees. Back to 1789, and we find Rooke opening up the smallest of the tumuli. He recorded and made sketches of his finds. These are corroded pieces of iron. And, quite exciting, this urn, also made of iron. This is how Rooke described it. Here we came to a kind of grey sand mixed with clay. On this lay an urn half full of ashes. To my great surprise, it appeared to be covered with rust. Rooke's investigations led him and his fellow antiquarians to the conclusion that the Romans used the ancient encampments for their own defensive purposes. This is how Hayman saw the site. He wrote, "We have reason to admire the judgment of the Romans in their choice of these camps." He was referring to the commanding views of the surrounding countryside, which made it easy to signal between camps. Being based in Mansfield Woodhouse, Rooke took a wide interest in the trees of Sherwood Forest and the antiquities within the area. But his work would also be specific in observing and recording natural and man-made features. A good example is Welbeck Estate, where he spent a lot of time sketching and helping the Duke of Portland with improvements that were being made to the house and garden. In the neighbouring estate of Thoresby, the hall has changed since Rooke drew it, around 1801. The spectacular beauty of the lake, for instance, appealed strongly to Rooke, and it's known that he produced a number of drawings and paintings of the landscape, especially the lake and cascade. A few examples remain, but most of his work here is lost to us today. The one exception shows how the Duke's family, the Pierponts, staged mock battles on the lake with model naval vessels. Tucked away in the corner on Rooke's painting is Budby Castle, known in those days as Castle William. Another feature that appealed to him is the cascade. His painting dates from around 1801. His drawings and paintings show the range of his interests. Papelwick Hall from the West Walk. A hill and tumuli at Rainworth. The Druid Stone in Blidworth. It's thousands of years old and has this man-made passage cut through it, possibly to align with the sunrise on the first day of spring. Rooke's take on it in 1783. What motivated Rooke? Clearly an intense and energetic desire to investigate and record, but his activities have also provided valuable contributions to present-day knowledge.
I'm here at Rooke's parish church, St Edmund's, Mansfield Woodhouse, a stone's throw from his home for about 40 years, Woodhouse Place. Hayman Rooke was active until the very end of his life. There is a story of his last day, as recounted by his nephew. Apparently, after his daily ride, the 83-year-old walked upstairs, got his brother to read his will to him, leaned back in his chair, and quietly died. He is buried here, at his church, as requested, beneath a simple slab near the altar. Here lies Hayman Rooke. The fact that we know so much about the history and heritage of Sherwood Forest is undoubtedly due to the soldier, historian and antiquarian
A man ahead of his time, Major Hayman Rooke.